live. All right, gang. Welcome back to the soapbox. We are getting back on one, and really just wanted to get on one and have a discussion about sort of general topics here. Nothing relatively specific, but want to chat about, I guess what it comes down to is, we talked a little bit about, I put up a post last week just about coaching development and ego and fear, but then also kind of dovetailing that into just understanding and respecting one another and what that looks like as well. So I think the biggest thing, and the reason why I think this is important, is because it absolutely transcends our coaching world, our fitness world, if that's something that we do. So I think here's what we need to dive into. One, that, and I've said this before, the most important attribute a coach can have is the ability to receive and implement feedback. Now, with that said, the putting yourself in that environment is really important, but then also really being honest and true with why you're doing something. So ego holds us back, right? And it's funny because oftentimes, certainly like in the gym world, is that people will think that they're really good, or that they might not need to receive certain, types of feedback or development because of the feedback that they're currently getting, right? Whether it's from their members, whoever it is, hey, you're the best, this or that. But, time and time again, I think that the biggest thing that you learn is the most influential people in the world, the most sought after from an inspirational perspective, the most looked up to, these people, all of it, they're very different from all around the world, but they have a similar character trait. And that character trait is that they are always reading, listening, learning, and growing. Now, I can't speak much to their ego because I don't know them, but they are always seeking to learn more. And I think the hardest thing people have the ability to do is receive feedback, because it kind of sucks, right? It sucks to be told that you could be doing something better, but you have to be able to put yourself in that position. And here's my biggest piece of advice to those out there is, you can't meet feedback with this. Well, I did this, or I said this because no one really cares, and nor should you, because you did it. And now you're receiving feedback on the end state, not the reason why you got there. Because honestly, I would say that the most adept individuals at giving feedback actually understand the reason why you're there, and they most likely agree with that, right? But it's the end state. So I think that's really, really important to understand, is that no one really cares why you did something. It's more importantly of what is the end state in a feedback environment, right? In a closed loop types of piece. So I wanted to hit you with that because I think that's important. And then also, I think it's important for us to, because we've got a lot of snowflakes out there now. We've got a lot of people that are relatively weak. And what I mean by that is, we're in the day and age where I don't think people receive feedback enough. I don't think people get put in their place enough, because I think people take it, they're either offended or they take it personally. And I'm going to take a stand. And on this podcast, I talk about certain things, but I do think that I try to toe the line and be politically correct. But so if I'm not politically correct here, I apologize, but it's how I feel, and it's truly how I believe and run my life. And it's worked out pretty well, and I've surrounded myself with people, I think, with similar types of values, but we all don't think alike. And I think that's important, is that we cannot surround ourselves with people that have the same exact views and the same exact understandings, because we're all different. But what that also leads to is more progressive feedback, looking at things, challenging of whatever it might be. And I think that's really, really important. So in the coaching world, you should, getting feedback from other coaches, from other people in disciplines, those types of things are really powerful, because you're going to get a different perspective, and different perspectives should open up your eyes. And if you're shut off to different perspectives, you will be shut off from growth. And I think that's a problem. And in the fitness world specifically, because certainly CrossFit world, because I think a lot of people are quick to think that whatever they're doing is the best, or whatever someone else is doing is not good, and as opposed to learning. Everyone has different best practices, right? Like, so, because at the truest sense of CrossFit, we're the generalists. So we beg, borrow, and steal from other people and other specializations to overlay that across our general implications. And I think that's so beautiful because it's so true. But we can't lose sight of that. It's that, like, the minute that you think that what you're doing is the best, it's sort of the antithesis of what CrossFit is founded on, which is always learning to get better and to optimize general physical preparedness. And so remember that. And it obviously, so you have methodology one, but also coaching. And obviously that's your implementation of the methodology and the curation of the process. So that's probably the most important from a feedback perspective, because it doesn't matter how well your program's written on a piece of paper on a whiteboard. It's how well can you implement it, and how well and easily and consistently it can be received and put into play. And that is what you should be judged on, more importantly than anything else, right? Because we know anyone that follows a program consistently is going to see some level of adaptation better than someone that follows, another program inconsistently. It might, even if it's superior from whatever perspective you look at. I think everyone's going to agree with that. So what we need to start to understand is that, one, feedback is tough, but you got to toughen up. And your view and how you feel, and your feelings don't really matter so much. And I think we're in this world where I think a lot of people overvalue their feelings. And let me put a pause, right? And in turn, feedback's hard, or you don't seek it out, or you surround yourself with yes men and yes women, so you're never being challenged, or you're never putting yourself into environments that challenge you, or when you do, you're shut down because you're afraid, or whatever it might be. And keep in mind, I understand emotions and feelings. And what I mean by that is, what a lot of people don't know about me is that I went through a very unique period of time in my life where I was shipped away in stripped of essentially my entire identity. I was shipped away to the woods for 2 months, and then I was down in a therapeutic boarding school for 2 years where we did more therapy and more talking about your feelings than I would venture to say most people ever do in their whole life, or many people combined. And learned a lot. And understanding emotions and feelings are important. And understanding how things make you feel are very important. How things that have happened to you manifest into actions. Oftentimes because we don't let true emotional pain manifest and for you to feel it, so you push down and it comes out in other ways. Now, the reason why I go down this rabbit hole is because getting feedback about certain things might bring up previous emotions from things that have happened, but what it really shouldn't do is invoke an emotional response that brings upon defensiveness, because that's your ego getting in the way. It's, and a few things is when you go down, the true feelings rabbit hole, in order to get to true raw emotion, you need to get to the root cause. And usually in a lot of people's lives, there's a lot of pain, a lot of anguish, a lot of things that have brought about suffering. And everyone deals with these things, right? And then they manifest. So oftentimes what happens is when you receive feedback, it brings you back to this portion because you feel some way about yourself and you have negative self-talk, and it pulls you back into that. But whatever you're receiving that feedback on, or whatever you're hearing in disagreement, it has nothing to do with that. So people talk about politics, they talk about religion, they talk about nutrition, and people get so fired up and emotional about it, which I don't really understand why. Because one, it's important to learn from different perspectives and different angles. But the nice thing is that, that's the beauty of humans, is that we're very different. So learning those different perspectives and listening is very important. If you listen, you don't necessarily have to agree. If you're speaking, you need to make sure you do as much listening as talking. Ironically enough, as I talk into a one-way microphone and camera, right? Funny. But listening is very important. It's a skill, And I think what we've lost that ability, certainly from a mainstream perspective. And it's look what's happening around us. It's very scary. And it's because people think that they are right or other people are wrong. They're in the right, they're in the wrong, as opposed to people just being different. And I pull this back to feedback, is that the nice thing about feedback is that you have subjective and you also have objective stuff. So, and the subjective stuff's harder to hear because you're always subject to like, well, that class was boring, as an example. Well, that is subjective, as opposed to you didn't call enough reps. Why? Well, you only called 5 repetitions. You had a class of 15 people and we're doing a snatch, right? Yes, there's a subjective notion of what is too much or too little, but at some point a professional in the field needs to denote what is enough and what is not enough. We could also just say you didn't call any corrections, or you didn't, or no movement got better from the corrections you called. You can have objective measurements there. And then from there, we can, and that's why I definitely recommend for those of you out there that are struggling with this stuff, stick with the objective stuff, and you take this, with anything is just facts. Hey, well, what are the facts? What happened? What didn't happen? Got it. And then let's work on that, right? And I would steer away from the subjective stuff. The more acumen you have in a field, the more respect you have, the more you can dovetail that, because people want your opinion on their class, right? So if someone's evaluating my class, I want their opinion. Was it fun? And was it whatever it was, right? Because that's important, because I care about that. I truly do, right? And that's another thing is like, starting to seek this stuff out as well can be helpful from a subjective side. So, as we kind of go down this rabbit hole of understanding ego and what this looks like and how it can really, push you away from actual growth. And I think it manifests in fear and also like failure, right? Like, how do you find failure? Because oftentimes if you're in the boat of struggling with feedback, or don't even know if you get it, then you are probably a person that gets really disappointed when you don't do things correctly. You can get demotivated. So you either try to do things perfectly all the time, or you start, or you think you're doing things right all the time to trick yourself, right? Your ego gets in the way. Or you have this unbelievable amount of negative self-talk and you just think, oh man, I suck. I'm not good. I'm not good at this. I can't do this. All of it leads to the same end, no growth. Now, we as a society tend to gravitate more towards people that have negative self-talk, and we want to help them and support them because we often see someone that is helpable. We also, as humans, gravitate towards helping people that seem, in need of help, or weaker, for lack of a better way to put it. Not that they're weaker, but on the contrary, as opposed to people that have this big ego, right? We think about them as assholes. We think about those as bad people or jerks or whatever it might be, but they're suffering from the same fault. It's just manifesting in ego, overcompensating, defending, being adversarial, as opposed to being, introverted, being, low on oneself, being, sort of reclusive, being negative to oneself as opposed to others, right? So, and I would, and again, this is one of those things where, and this is why I do think a lot of people, when they talk this big talk, if you really want to be inclusive, you need to be inclusive to both sides. You need to be inclusive to the people that you don't like. It's okay not to like people. It's okay to be turned off by people. It's okay to be pushed away. But it doesn't. You just have to be honest with yourself, and you also realize that we hope that there's as many people out there that want to help that group of people that want to help other group of people, and the opportunity I've had of coaching development programs and seminars and meeting so many people is that you meet a lot of people. And it's really easy to be turned off by people that you might not jive with, that you might assume certain things. And the biggest thing I've learned is to ask questions, to learn. And this is this big thing going around the world right now. You have diversity and inclusion and all this stuff. And I don't know anyone that's going to argue with all that, but I think this inclusivity thing right? I think that we talk about diversity and inclusion. I think you got to talk about inclusion before you talk about diversity. And what I mean by that is, in order for me to understand someone that's different in any way, I need to learn about them. I need to learn about their experiences, good and bad, their perspectives, their views, what has happened to them, what hasn't happened to them. Because in turn, I'm going to learn about, and that's being inclusive. And this is where it really starts with breaking someone's ego down and also learning about people. Because then you become vulnerable, and you both become vulnerable, and you realize that we're just humans. And yeah, we're absolutely different from an experiential perspective, from how we look perspective, to the privileges that we've had or haven't had, to the choices that we've made, which have maybe defined our life. And we got to own that, the people that we surrounded ourselves with. But if we learn that, then what you start to learn is that, wow, having all these different people around me is important because they're different. So I think that you can never assume. You need to learn. Many of you don't know about my life story because you don't know me. But the more you learn about me, you might understand where I come from. You might understand where my beliefs are. You might understand why my life is the way it is now, and it was very different 15 years ago. And by no means does this make me better or worse or perfect or imperfect. It just makes me me. And the more we start to understand this, and keep in mind, no one is without ego. It's always there. You're always fighting yourself. You're always going to fall into a trap. And here's the ugly thing about it. There's going to be blind spots because it's sort of like it's always better than you. It's always faster than you. It's always ahead of you. And you're going to look back and be disappointed or ashamed. And whatever it is, that's the way the world works and the way life works. It's ugly and it beats you up. And that's why I think, gosh, I just wish people were a little nicer to each other. And that's why I like an environment that is truly inclusive of people that have made mistakes, that have done things that you don't like, that have whether it's at the coaching floors, whatever it might be, because I wouldn't be here today if people judged me by certain actions and how I coached on the floor, by my ability to do certain things, or how I behaved as a human being pre-CrossFit. I would never be here. And that's what breaks my heart. And I truly think at the core of it, people believe that, but I think that it's never truly understood until you go through something like that and have some clarity. This notion of because then you realize what really does matter. And you also realize that you have peaks and valleys, right? And I'm a believer, and I talked about this, the Pendulum Theory, that the lower you go, the higher you can go. But you got to feel that. And that's what we talked about emotions. You got to feel the pain. You got to feel the hurt in order to feel these great triumphs. Or else you can kind of stay in the middle. And I think a lot of people are relatively shallow. And again, because emotions are hard. Again, not shallow with like a negative connotation, but the truth. That the shallower you are, the less depth you have because you've avoided pain and emotions that you probably should experience. And I know I'm getting deep on you guys, but I do think this is important, that we have to feel these things. You need to, in order to be able to have a real conversation, because the confidence comes in that. With that confidence comes the ability to look someone in the eye and hear feedback, that you didn't do a good job, that you're not where you need to be, that you were wrong. And your answer is, you're right. Okay. There's so much power in that. Now, you need to act on it in order to really take that next step, or else you fall into this, and then essentially it's like, you're right or wrong, but I'm going to keep doing it. Now, that's ineffective, that's insubordination, that's a criminal, whatever it might be, as opposed to, you're right. I need to get better, then asking for help if you need it, or recalibrate and work on your own. So that's what I wanted to hit you with. I have no idea what I'm going to call this name of this podcast, from feedback to ego to emotions. But again, there's a lot. And we just need to be a little tougher, but also be a little more softer. Who would have thought? And the toughest people I know can also be the realest and most emotional, can also be the least polarizing, from the sense of, if you think or say this, then I hate you. People that say things like that and are relatively weak, okay? There are bad people, there are bad views, there's a lot of things out there, but the minute we go into this, if this, then that type of scenario, it's a dangerous, dangerous, slippery slope. So don't be shallow. Don't be so easily swayed. Learn about yourself before you worry about other people. And some really powerful things can happen to you, personally and professionally. 20 minutes, soapbox. I hope you enjoyed it.